Hey guys, welcome to the Elevate Church online experience. We love having you here every week. If this is your first time, an extra welcome to you. If you want to stay connected with us, don't forget to like and subscribe. The links are down below. Our worship partner this week is Gateway Music all the way from Texas. If you want to sing along, the words will be down below.
Holiness, brighter than the purest light. The wonder of His faithfulness, reaching down through all of time. The splendor of His mighty throne, the power that is His alone. How glorious, great and glorious, how glorious is our God, victorious, sovereign over us. How glorious is our God, the mystery of His righteousness, Jesus Christ who knew no sin. The anthem of His worthiness, sung by angels and by men, the splendor of His mighty throne, the power that is His alone. How glorious, great and glorious, how glorious is our God, victorious, sovereign over us. How glorious is our God, oh, is our God, yeah. The King of awesome majesty, the one who reigns eternally, forevermore. Creation sings, how glorious, how glorious, the King of awesome majesty. How glorious, how glorious. You go before I know that you've even gone to win my war. You come back with the head of my enemy. You come back and you call it my victory. Oh, oh, oh. You go before I know that you've even gone to win my war. Your love becomes my greatest defense. It leads me from the dry wilderness, and all I did was praise. All I did was worship. All I did was bow down. All I did was stay still. Hallelujah, you have saved me. So much better this way. Hallelujah, great defender. So much better your way. You know before I do, when my heart can see to find your truth. Mercy is the shade I'm living in, and you restore my faith and hope again. And all I did was praise. All I did was worship. All I did was bow. Picked up all my pieces, put me back together. You are the defender of my heart. When I thought I lost me, you knew where I left me. introduced me to your love. And you picked up all my pieces, put me back together. You are the defender of my heart. Hallelujah, you have saved me. So much better this way. Hallelujah, great defender. So much better your way. When I thought I lost me, you knew where I left me. You reintroduced me to your love. And you picked up all my pieces, put me back together. You are the defender of my heart. You are the defender of my heart. You are the defender of my heart.
So it's our final week of how we fight our battles. If you want to go back and watch any of the videos or listen on our podcast, I would suggest you do so. Our speaker this week is Steve Hall.
Hi, it's good to be back again. And I've got a question for you to kick off right from the start. The question is, how's your battle going? You're going through a series at the moment called How to Fight Your Battles. And so I want to ask, how are you going with it? Because the material you've had so far has been fantastic. And I trust you've gone through it, but I trust also you're putting some of those tools into place, and those battles that we all face, maybe you're starting to get on top of them. But here's the truth. You're always going to have battles. In fact, Carl Jung, a Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, the founder of analytical psychology, he wrote this in one of his books called Man and His Symbols. And he wrote this. He said, life is a battleground. It always has been and always will be. And if it were not, existence would come to an end. That's an interesting and scary thought, isn't it? You're always going to have them. They're going to be there. And in fact, they're part of life, because you see, a battle helps you grow stronger. A battle exercises those muscles that we've been teaching over the last few weeks. So we need these battles. We have to have them because they're an important part of our growth. They're an important part of recalibrating our life. But how do you actually fight them? And how are you going with that? Because here's the truth. The battles that you fight are the things that you fight for are those that you value. You don't fight for things that aren't valuable. You don't fight for things that aren't important to you or special to you. The greater the value, the greater the fight. The more special or significant something is to you, the greater the fight will be. James says something about this in Scripture. He's a guy that actually lived with God. Fancy that, hey? His big brother was the Son of God. Imagine living with the Son of God. Imagine what it would be like having life growing up and your big brother is the Son of God. You're sitting around the table. Mum gives everyone a piece of bread. You say your grace, you go to eat it. Your brother does, and all of a sudden his plate's full of bread. Or your mum gives you a glass of water and he ends up with a glass of red wine. I don't think it happened like that. In fact, it didn't. Creative license. But still, we understand from reading Scripture that James would have had some struggles. There were some times where he did push back on this concept that his brother was this Messiah. And he writes this. So when you understand that, you can understand his words when we read this letter that he wrote to the Christian Jewish church at that time, not long after Jesus had actually parted from earth. And this is what he writes in James 4:1. What is causing the quarrels and fights among you? Don't they come from the evil desires at war within you? That sounds like a battleground to me. In fact, in the Passion version, it says this: what is the cause of your conflicts and quarrels with each other? Doesn't the battle begin inside of you as you fight to have your own way and fulfill your own desires? The battle starts within. The greatest battle we have is the battle internally, which actually causes the external. He goes on to say in the New Living Translations, you want what you don't have, so you scheme and kill to get it. You are jealous of what others have, but you can't get it. So you fight and you wage war to take it away from them. Yet you don't have what you want because you don't ask God. In other words, our focus needs to change. The focus that causes most of our internal struggles is the focus on me. We live in a me society. We live in a my rights society. And so when we look at this and we hear what James is trying to tell us, I discover a lot of me. That the struggles I have, the anxiety that I might go through, the panic attacks I have, are mostly because I'm afraid of me. Might be carrying shame, might be carrying disappointments, but it's usually an internal. Interesting, it was Jung who also said when he was dealing with an alcoholic and he was trying to help this alcoholic break his addiction. And in the end, he said this. He'd gone through all the processes and he said this: this alcoholic condition is near to hopelessness, save only the possibility of a spiritual experience. Interesting, because Jung, we don't believe was necessarily a believer, but he had a spiritual awareness. And his comment was, this alcoholic needs some spiritual intervention. You see, for us to break the strongholds and the battles, sometimes in life, we need spiritual intervention. In fact, I'm going to even go further than that. And I'm going to say that we do need spiritual intervention because it's changing our focus. It's interesting because that guy that he actually sent away to the Oxford group ended up being the fellow that started the AA movement way back. Jung actually said this, he, after working with the patient for some time and he was asked if he would write something. And so he said this. He said, I say you are in the Oxford group. So long as you are there, you settle your affairs with the Oxford group. So this guy wrote back to him and asked him for more help. He said, no, fulfill the purposes of the Oxford group, which was this Christian group, this spiritual group that was helping this man work through his addiction. And he said this, I can't do it better than Jesus. So here is it. In our battles, when our focus is on us, our opportunities are limited, our resources are limited because they're limited to us. But when we turn our focus to Jesus, when we turn our focus spiritually, when we turn our focus somewhere else, all of a sudden there's a whole resource that we've never had before. We call this worship because worship is simply, and we get that confused, don't we? We say, yeah, we go to church for worship. We actually have a worship set. You might have on your music list a list which says, contemporary music. It might go 80s rock and roll, which is pretty good, or 60s or 70s, and then you have your worship set. Worship is more than music. Worship is more than just music that attracts me. Worship is when we turn our attention to God. So you worship what you value. Hence, we battle what we value. What if I turned that value to a God that is greater. A God that says, I can do all things. What if I could actually turn my focus in worship to God? James actually goes on to say this. He says, come close to God and God will come close to you. Do you see that? If I move from my battlefield towards God, He will come close to me. And then it says, wash your hands, you sinners, purify your hearts, for your loyalty is divided between God and the world. Worship takes my loyalty from the things of the world to the things of God. Worship takes my loyalty and focus it back to the one I want to be loyal to. One of the best stories behind this is that of Elijah. And I've mentioned this in a few messages, but I love this story of Elijah. Because Elijah was in a time in Israel way back, just after King David had been around. And there was a king called Ahab. And Ahab, he got into a relationship with a lady called Jezebel and ended up taking the leadership of that country from focusing on worshiping God to worshiping foreign gods. And one particular one was the god Baal. And because of that, there was a big drought in the land. There was a great drought for 3 years. So much so that the animals were starting to starve, the crop wasn't growing, there wasn't food for the horses. And Ahab decided that I need to go out and find a place where there's at least a little bit of growth where our horses can feed on. So he goes off, but in that time, God speaks to Elijah. And he calls Elijah to stand up because at that time too, all the prophets of God were hiding. They were off the scene. They were out of here. They were hiding in a cave, being fed, being looked after. But Elijah has got this challenge to go and challenge Ahab. If you will turn your attention back to God, then this battle of drought, this battle that's taking out your country, will be solved and rain will come. See, sometimes in our battle, we feel like we're starving. Sometimes in our battle, we feel like there's just a drought. But when we turn our attention and when we bring ourselves to worship, then the rain starts to come. That fresh fire starts to come. And all of a sudden, the possibilities start to become real. And our battles start to get fought by a God who comes to fight our battles. But it starts by actually deciding who will we follow. Because Elijah says this back in 1 Kings 18:21. It says, Elijah stood in front of them. This is the people of God. He said, how much longer will you waver, hobbling between the two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, and follow him. But the people were completely silent. In other words, they weren't sure who they were going to follow. They weren't sure who they were going to trust in. When it comes to the battle, who are you going to rely on? Are we going to rely upon me? Are we going to rely upon the resources of the world? Are we going to rely on those things that we worship, that we value? Or would we decide to stop going from one to the other and focus on God? Worship is a key to breaking the drought. Worship is the key when it comes to fighting the battles. I want to go through this story a little bit more with you because it first of all starts when Elijah says this. It says, we pick it up. It says, then Elijah calls the people. So he says to Ahab in the story, he says, see what we're going to do. We're going to test out which God is the greatest. Is it Baal or is it Jehovah? Which one? Jehovah, God of Israel. Who is the greater? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a challenge. It's a barbecue challenge. We're going to go up to Mount Carmel and we're going to set up these two altars and we're going to put a sacrifice on there. We're going to put a couple of bulls on there, right? That's a bit scary, isn't it? We're in a drought. We're struggling here. But we're going to find these calves, these bulls. We're going to put them on there. We're going to cut them up and we're going to call on gods to come and light the fire. Bring fire down from heaven and set these sacrifices up. So they get up on the mountain. He says, listen, there's more of you than me. There's 400 prophets and there's one of me who's a prophet of Jehovah. So I'll let you guys go first. Show me how it's done. So they built this altar. They get the wood on it. They get the sacrifice. They put that on top. And they started calling on their god of Baal. They started doing what they would usually do. They're dancing, they're shouting, they're doing all the things that would call their god to come down and light that barbecue. But guess what? Nothing happened. So they got a bit excited. They went, well, I'll tell you what, we'll start cutting ourselves to show how important this is. So they start cutting themselves up, which was another tradition. And they're cutting themselves up. There's more blood on their arms and their faces, and because they're cutting themselves up. And Elijah gets a little bit cheeky. He sort of says, well, maybe your God's asleep. Maybe he's out doing some business somewhere. Maybe he's just on holidays. I don't know. But your God isn't turning up. So then he does this. He says, now it's my turn. But look what he does. He first of all says, then Elijah did what? He called the people. Come over here. They all crowded around him as he repaired the altar of the Lord that had been torn down. Elijah says, come on, everybody, watch me. And he puts the altar that once was big and strong, has now been knocked down. The rocks are everywhere. And he starts to bring those rocks down and he starts to build that altar afresh. But here's the key. The first thing comes the call. See, we need to be called out from the circumstance. We need to be called out from that which is the battlefield. Moses in Exodus 33, it says that what he did was he was pretty busy with all the problems of the people of the time, just taking them out of the wilderness, and they were very needy people. But what he would do is he would get a tent, and it says, and he set it outside of the camp. You had to walk away from the camp to sit with God. And there's a calling out. God calls us out of our circumstance. Sometimes we need to just step away. When we're in the middle of the battle zone, we need some fresh air. We need to just stop focusing on that. Have you noticed when we're in a battle that consumes our thinking? It consumes our emotion. Everything is about that problem. And there's time when we need to put it aside, because God's calling us out. Worship is when we are called out. Jesus called his disciples. He said, come with me up a mountain. And he called them away from the crowds, just a few of them, up on a mountain to worship. Even Jesus himself, when he was about to go into the cross and do the biggest battle of all, he went away into the garden by himself. You see, worship is a calling. It's a calling out from where we are and a calling to. It's a calling our focus away. Stop focusing on that, but come over here. It's a great book that I read of a gentleman that was working with street kids, and he was on a train. And as he was on this train, he saw one of the girls that had come off the street. She was looking out the window. And he went up to her and said, are you okay? And she said, I didn't realize I could see so far. Because you see, this poor girl, her focus had been on herself. Her focus had been down at her feet. Her focus had been on her own self-worth, which wasn't very much at all. And as she looked internally, she couldn't look ahead. And there's times when we need to lift our heads up and away from the issue. To fight the battle, I'm going to encourage you to listen to the call of God that says, come out with me. Come away with me. Come and sit with me. And let's rebuild that altar that once was there for worship. The altar was designed for worship. And he calls us away. But notice this in verse 31 of chapter 18. It says, he took 12 stones, one to represent each of the tribes of Israel. And he used the stones to rebuild the altar in the name of the Lord. Then he dug a trench around the altar large enough to hold about 3 gallons of water. I love this because here's a great picture. What he did was he got these stones that represented the people groups and he put them together. You know, worship. Yes, it's great to do worship individually. I love just to sit and listen to worship. I love to walk out in the bush and turn my attention off all the busyness of this world and just think about God for a while. It's great doing it alone, but there's power when we do it together. They're calling together, the gathering of the saints. That's why we come on a Sunday. We gather together to worship together. I mean, it was Jesus in Matthew 18:5. He said, where 2 or 3 are gathered, come together in my name. There I am in the midst of them. A calling out and a calling to. It's actually a calling together. You know, we were never meant to do life together. We were meant to do it in community. We were meant to do it together. The church is the body, the gathering of individuals. And I encourage you to make sure that we take time out to gather together to worship. It's not individual, it's corporate. And there's a corporate worship. And he did this together. The people of God coming together. But notice what happens next in 33. So we have the calling, then we had the gathering, and now we go a little further. 18, verse 33. It says this. Picture this. He piled wood, heaps of it, on top of all these bricks, on these rocks, on the altar. He cut the ball into pieces and laid those pieces on the wood. Then he said, fill 4 large jars with water and pour the water over the offering and the wood. Man, it's getting soaked. After they had done this, he said, do the same thing again. And when they had finished, he said, now do a 3rd time. So they did it as he said. And the water ran around the altar and filled that trench he'd built. As the usual time for offering the evening sacrifice, Elijah, the prophet, walked up to the altar. O Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, prove today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant. Prove that I have done all that is at your command. You see, the key to worship is one, to know that God calls us out to be with him. He calls us to gather together. But there's the important part. It's the sacrifice. It's a sacrifice. It's when I'm prepared to actually put stuff down. It's hard to take someone's advice if I don't first let go of some of my opinions. I need to free myself up. If I want God to fight the battle, I've got to let him be in the driver's seat. I'm not asking him to help me. I'm asking him to fight the battle. And so I want to come to that place of worship, but it's also a place of sacrifice. It's a place of laying it down. You see, sometimes there's things that just get in the way. Hey, they're those things that we don't want to let go of. What people think of me, I don't want to let go of that. My rights, I don't want to let go of that. Or maybe it might be those habits or those things that I just enjoy doing. Or maybe it might be that attention I've got on success that God says, give that to me as well. Because if we give it to him, we can trust him with it, because he will actually cause it to fight the battle. See, in Romans 12:1, it says this, therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. That's something that we tend to find that kind of hard, don't we? We want God to fix the problems, but we don't want to let go of a few things. It's hard to pick something up if my hands are clenched, if my hands are full. And sometimes we just got to let go and let God. Sometimes we've got to just say, God, I'm worshiping you because you are Jehovah. You are Jehovah Jireh. You are the God of all creation, and you can do all things. When we worship and let him fight the battles, when we take our value and we move our value to him, and we value him more than anything else, all of a sudden, we start to come into victory. See, 1 Kings 8:37 goes on like this. And the Lord answered me. Don't you love that? The Lord answered me. Answer me so these people know that you, O Lord, are God. That you have brought them back to yourself. Immediately, the fire of the Lord flashed down from heaven and burnt up the young bull, the wood, the stones, and the dust. It even licked up the water in the trenches. You see, this was a costly thing. The bull, first of all, remember they're in a drought. They're struggling for food. So to sacrifice a bull, that's one thing. To sacrifice water was another thing. I mean, there's a drought. Water is precious. Water is to die for. And yet, ask God to burn that up. And what he does when he sees that heart of sacrifice, he goes, now let me come in. And fire came down from heaven and it burnt up everything. It took over. There's victory for the prophet because now God has proved himself to be real. When God shows up, sometimes we find there's a drought in our spiritual walk. When we come to a place of worship, when he calls us out, when we lay everything down, fire comes from heaven and he proves once again he is God and he is bigger than the battle. He has the victory. It says in 1 John 5:4, it says, for everyone born of God overcomes the world. This is the victory that has overcome the world, even our faith. You see, the victory is ours, the Bible says, of the battle. But we don't find the victory when we focus on the battle. We find the victory when we focus on the God of the battle. And I love this because then it goes and Elijah is up there on the mountain and he says, look out, can you see any rain coming yet? And they look out, they can't see any. He says, look out again. He looks out again, can't see it. 7 times. And finally he looks out and the servant says, I can see a cloud the size of a fist. So he says to Ahab, you better get on your bike, buddy. You better get running because that flood's coming. There is going to be a downpour like you've never seen before. And Ahab gets on his chariot and he starts taking off. But the energy that comes on Elijah is greater than he's ever had before. And it has the ability to not just run faster than the horses. He runs past the horses and gets home before Ahab could even get there on his horses. He ran past it. He had extra energy. He had extra adrenaline that was pumping through him. You know, God says, I will beat the battle of the drought if you look to me. I will beat the battle of the drought if you worship me. I will beat the battle of the drought if you look to me as being the overcomer, not yourself. When that fire and that flood then falls, let me tell you, you are full of an energy that goes beyond your expectation. There is an energy and a joy in your life that this battle has sucked out, but God replaces. And I want to encourage you today, if you're facing those battles, as we all do, and we will continue to do, rather than look at the battle, turn to God in worship. And rather than let the battle suck your energy out, suck out that joy, suck that power, suck that living water, suck that fire of God out of you, rather than allow the battle to do that and be overcome by that and let it control your life. I encourage you, listen to the call to come away. Listen to the call of God to say, gather together with others. Listen to the call of God that says, let go and sacrifice those things that are special to you, that are valuable to you. And you watch me have the victory and fill our lives afresh with that energy and that joy and that peace that only comes when we actually focus on Him. And if that's you today, I encourage you, worship a God who is the creator of heaven and earth, who is Jehovah Jireh, the God of the beginning and the God of the end, the God that holds your future, the God who says, I love you and I died for you and I want to fight your battles for you. He has the victory and He wants to give that victory to you and I.
So great message on worship today. We're going to take another opportunity for you to worship.
When darkness tries to roll over my bones, when sorrow comes to steal the joy I own, when brokenness and pain is all I know, oh, I won't be shaken, I won't be shaken, 'cause my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. Shame no longer has a place to hide, for I am not a captive to the lies, and I'm not afraid to leave my past behind. No, I won't be shaken, I won't be shaken, 'cause my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. There's power that can break off every chain. There's power that can empty out a grave. There's a resurrection power that can save. There's power in your name, power in your name. There's power that can break off every chain. There's power that can empty out a grave. There's a resurrection power that can save. There's power in your name, power in your name. 'Cause my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. Yeah, my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. I'm standing in your love. Yeah, yeah, I am standing on the rock. Yeah, I am standing in your love. Yeah, I am standing on the rock, my firm foundation, my firm foundation. Yeah, I am standing on the rock. Yeah, I am standing in your love. Yeah, I am standing on the rock, my firm foundation, my firm foundation. 'Cause my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. I'm standing in your love. Yeah.
So if you've had a chance to give before, we thank you so much. But if you'd like to today, the links will be down below. So thanks for joining us today, guys. We've got a new message next week, so stay tuned for that.